It's the 11th century, it's the 12th century more or less, and you are traveling from Syria to Iraq by that road. Well, you're planning to anyway. That's you. But you're worried because you don't have guards and it's dangerous. So you're debating with your traveling companions whether you should go. At that moment, a fresh-faced, late antique holy man appears and offers to teach you a prayer that will guide you safely across the desert. Well, you decide to go, and it works, or at least you make it. But when you arrive in Iraq, your fresh-faced, late antique holy man has disappeared. Rumor has it that he's gone drinking in a tavern. You find this news distressing, but you decide to investigate. So against your better judgment, you go into the tavern. And when you do, you find that your fresh-faced, late antique holy man has become an old drunkard. And you describe the scene in rhymed prose. فإذا الشيخ في حلة ممصرة بين دنان ومعصرة وحوله سقاة تبهر والشموع تزهر وآس وعبهر ومزمار ومزهر وهو تارة يستبذل الدنان وطورا يستنطق العيدان ودفعة يستنشق الريحان وأخرى يغازل الغزلان. Well, naturally, you rebuke him. And he answers with a poem, of which this is a small part. لزمت الصفار وجبت القفار وعفت النفار لأجني الفرح وخضت السيول وردت الخيول لجري ذيول الصبا والمرح ومت الوقار وبعت العقار لحسو العقار ورشف القدح, which might be translated as follows. Through lands that swelter for lack of shelter, I rode a skelter to find my joy. I urged my horses down watercourses to where the source is, a mirthful boy. My land I deeded for what I needed had gone unheeded. Why, 'twas wine. And all the chanting you found enchanting, why I was panting to reach the vine. I rode beside you at first to chide you and then to guide you to old Iraq. Now don't you dare me, you'll never scare me, so why not spare me your rude attack? We're growing older, who wants to molder? Why not be bolder and drain the glass? Whatever ails you when life assails you, wine never fails you, you silly ass. Now that is a very brief introduction to something called a maqama, which is a genre of short story in rhymed prose and verse. My friend Shaka Turawa has brilliantly suggested that it be translated imposture, so that's what I'm going to do. The author is al-Ḥarīrī, and for those of you who are not Arabists, you may think of him as the silk merchant. He wasn't, but that's his name. The hero of the Impostures is a man named Abu Zaid. You can call him Double Daddy. So he's the one who appears now as a holy man and now as a drunkard. He has a sidekick, who's also the narrator, that's you, al-Ḥarīrī, which means plowman. And I told the story using illustrations that have been mentioned several times already as being very famous and well known. These are the illustrations done by al-Wasiti, who also actually made the copy, which he illustrated. And that's the whole scene that I took bits from, the whole tavern scene. So completed in 634, 1237, and available to everyone on the lovely website of the Bibliothèque Nationale. Now, al-Ḥarīrī, the silk merchant, did not invent this genre of the imposture. It was actually invented by a boy genius or prodigy called Badi' al-Zaman al-Hamadani, whose name means prodigy. The reason he was called that is that he could extemporize or improvise seemingly impossible pieces of language. So he could, without preparation, compose a treatise on any topic that would read identically backwards or forwards. He could compose a treatise on any topic using only the dotted letters in Arabic, or a treatise on any topic using only the undotted letters in Arabic, or a treatise on any topic alternating between dotted and undotted words. So I couldn't find a picture of him, so you're just going to have to go with that. So I think that's from Action Comics. I'm not sure what year it was, not sure the provenance. We don't have a colophon. Anyway, Action Comics, probably 1937. That's Superman lifting stuff. Now, al-Ḥarīrī was the opposite. Ḥarīrī, who the silk merchant, author of the second set of impostures, tried to outdo, to imitate, to match the wonder of the age, Badi' al-Zaman. Unfortunately, though, he's described, his biographers, his friends, described him as extremely clever and articulate. This is now Hamadani, but also short, ugly, stingy, and filthy in his person. But worst of all, he could not compose on the spot. He could not compose, he could not extemporize. Instead of extemporizing, he would, quote, blacken one page after another, unable to put two words together. And while doing this, he would pull at his beard, which I think is what the artist of this cover artist is trying to depict. I believe this. I had a college roommate who never displayed emotion, but when he was upset, he would pull at the top of his head. And after a year, he had a... So I acknowledge this is a real thing. And he was repeatedly humiliated by people asking him, oh, if you're going to write Maqamat, why don't you try one without dots or whatever? Here's one of the things that happened when people asked him to do that. Taking pen case and paper, he went off to a corner of the audience room and remained there for a good long while. But no inspiration came, and he went out mortified. When he finally did manage to put together Maqamat, he was accused of having plagiarized them. That's how unlikely an author he seemed, or unlikely a rival to baby Superman. Well, in the end, though, al-Ḥarīrī, the silk merchant, had the last laugh. He finally managed to put together his 50. Al-Hamadani was credited with 40, so he decided to outdo him and write 50. And sometime in the middle of January 1111, he took them, he took his 50 Maqamat, and he went, no doubt in a state of extreme anxiety, to Baghdad to read them in public. Al-Wasiti is fantastic at depicting these kind of crowd scenes. So I imagine that somehow you see Ḥarīrī, this is not Ḥarīrī, but translation, right? So that's the idea. All these people kind of like this, waiting, right? Well, obviously he couldn't read all 50 at one time. So it took actually more than a month. People kept coming back. He'd read one, they'd come back for more. They'd come back for more. They'd come back for more. He actually didn't read them. He had them copied out and had someone else read them. So you can imagine him not quite like this, but still sitting there in terror, listening to his creations, his labored creations that he pulled his beard out to create, being read aloud to the most distinguished philologists and scholars of Baghdad. Well, how do we know all this? Am I just making it up? No. We have the copy that was held in the doubtless sweaty hand of whoever it was that read this for him. It's known as Cairo Adab 105. And this is his autograph. The Sheikh Abu al-Mu'ammar al-Mubarak Ibn Abdul Aziz al-Ansari heard from me the 50 impostures I wrote, written by al-Ḥarīrī in Baghdad in Sha'ban 504. I hereby granting him permission to transmit it. So the 50 impostures are written by this al-Mubarak, and the author, the silk merchant, al-Ḥarīrī, signs on the front that he's okay with that. Al-Mubarak writes at the end that he copied the work from a draft in the author's hand after reading it out loud for correction. So what this tells us is that Cairo 105 is actually the copy read aloud to the author and corrected as necessary by him. So it's as close as we'll ever get to an autograph, which is unusual for a work like this. And we even know who was watching the silk merchant's terrifying coming out party in Baghdad, because they wrote, everybody who made it to the end had their name written in the list of witnesses. So there were a total of 36 auditors, 27 of whom, I believe 29 perhaps, actually listened, made it to every session. But that's not all. The copy itself was then used to teach the work an additional 28 times, the last time being in 683, 1284. And al-Ḥarīrī himself was quoted as saying that he personally authorized 700 additional copies. When I first read that, I said, nonsense. But Professor Saeed and Bilal Abdul Hadi were kind enough to point out to me that, no, it's actually quite possible if you do them all at once, right? So if I were to read the 50 Maqamat and you all copied them right now, we'd have quite a few, right? So just do that a lot, and it's not so implausible. So I retract my cynical remark. Everything I've just told you is not something I discovered. It's all in a very nice article by Pierre Mackay, rahimahullah, who wrote in 1971 a very careful study of this manuscript, Cairo 105. Now, in the course of becoming a global bestseller, the impostures of al-Ḥarīrī took on some odd attributes. For example, each of the episodes acquired a title. So for example, in the 19th century edition of Dussacy, we have the number and the title. So it's imposture number 37, the Sa'diyya, Sa'd being a town in Yemen. Sa'da, sorry, Sa'da. This application of titles carries over into the translation. So here, for example, is the translation of Chenery, actually Steingas, for number 37. The 37th Assembly, that was an older English name for these, called of Sa'da. And then modern Arabic editions also do this. al-Maqamat 37 وتعرف بالصعدية. So this idea that in addition to a sequence number, each episode should have a title is something that seems now to be the way it's always been. But if we look at 105, there aren't titles. So this is just number 37. Now you may think that it's hiding over in that right-hand margin, but those are actually all those things that Professor Kropp was telling us about. So these are who read it, who got that far, and so on. So no title. Here's number 40. Oh, sorry, 42. Maqam al-Thani. I just picked these at random. Again, no title. So where did the titles come from? Now, in Mackay's article, he denounces an early manuscript from Istanbul. He says it's a forgery. Let's take a look at that. This is Istanbul University, A4566. Looks rather respectable. Ah, but no. Somebody painted over deliberately all of the marginal notations. So it's very common in all of these manuscripts to find marginal comments because al-Ḥarīrī went out of his way to use the most difficult words in Arabic. So every copy of this that was ever used by anybody has scribbles in the margins or interlinearly about what the words mean. In this case, somebody went to all the trouble to make sure that they weren't there anymore. Now, I don't know why. One theory, I mean, those of you who understand these things will have to explain. My working theory, before I met all of you, was that somebody felt they could sell it, but they wanted to sell a clean copy, so they did that. But if you're broke, would you be able to afford that kind of, I don't know, I don't know. But the plot thickens because on the right side, you see that this manuscript also contains another supposed signature of the author. Now, the date works, except that he claims, the person who claims to have, to whom he claims to have transmitted it, seems to have been a more or less fictional character who appears in one of the stories. And this is Mackay's issue, the handwriting doesn't seem to be the same. So again, I am utterly unqualified to pronounce on whether that's true. My handwriting has deteriorated terribly in the course of my life, but I don't know whether that happened to them too. Another scholar whose opinion I respect, Matthew Keegan, has argued that, well, it may not be an autograph, but it's old. And one thing that leads me to agree with him is that we actually see the process by which the titling begins. Because here you have al-Maqama as-Sabi'a wa Thalathun, and then somebody in the margin wrote, وَتُعْرَفْ بِالصَّعِيدِيَّة. Now he got it wrong, but still, it's close enough. I mean, in other words, wrong meaning that it was later called the Sa'diyya, not the Sa'idiyya. Maybe it was just an Egyptian feeling patriotic and they decided to do that. But the point is that, now, how does this, now again, I'm imagining, those of you who know will have to correct me, but I imagine that if you are studying this intensively over a long period of time, at some point it's not feasible anymore to say, let's read number 15 or let's read number 12. Or what about that word back in number 36? Nobody can keep track. I've been working on this book for 5 years and I have no idea anymore what the numbers mean. But if somebody says, it's the one about Sa'da. And so somebody then writes in the margin, oh, this is the Sa'di one. And eventually they become an accepted part of the text. So here's a close-up. You see, Tu'raf bi Sa'idiyya. And then, in fact, I think all of them in this manuscript do this. So here's number 40. Tu'raf bi Tabriziyya. And again, I have no idea whether you would say that's the same hand, a different hand, whether it looks like the ink looks the same to me, but this is not my specialty. Professor Yarbo, in his preparation for this workshop, was kind enough to discover and let me know about the fact that we have a copy right here, which I never knew about. And I went with great eagerness during lunch yesterday down to the rare books room, down to special collections, and grabbed it with both hands. They almost threw me out. And here it is. And to prove that you need professionals, I did find the colophon, which is the last, the date at the bottom, which I then proceeded to not be able to read because it all went very well. وقع الفراغ منها, meaning copying it, and then يوم, okay, and then I just saw a big squiggle. Luke then said, "Oh, but that's al-Arbia." I said, "Oh, okay, I see that now." Muntasaf, so far so good. And then I see a sana, I see a saba, I see the beginning of what looks like a thalathun. And then because I know when he lived, okay, I mean, it's the 5th century, 6th century, so it's khamsi right? And then magically, when the date is over, it immediately returns to normal Arabic and it's utterly clear again. So I'm delighted to be able to show you this so that you can all come up and tell me, well, clearly it says. The description in the catalog says that it's Jumada al-Ula, but Luke points out persuasively that it's probably Akhira, right? Akhira. And then Sanad Saba, the description says it's Thamanun. If anyone, or Thamanin, if anyone agrees, I believe you, because I have no idea what that says. So this is what happens when you are a scholar of literature and you actually confront the real thing. Fortunately, though, for the dummies in the room, they actually went and wrote it clearly somewhere else. Well, what someone wrote was, the dummy meaning me, of course, is that the date is actually clearly, the date at which it was read and taught is actually written clearly there. So you see, ثمانين وخمسمائة, سنة ثمان وثمانين وخمسمائة. So I felt a little better after that. But again, I'm actually taking advantage of your presence here so that somebody can tell me what it is that's happening in the bottom line there. Now, the last point I want to make about this particular manuscript is this. The Impostures of al-Ḥarīrī have been more commented upon probably than any other secular text. If that's, I don't like the word, but whatever. And so there are extensive and effusive and long-winded commentaries on practically every word of this thing, except one little sequence that not only is not commented on by anyone, but it's not even voweled in most manuscripts. And that is a moment that I felt should be carefully excavated, because it's in the course of a rather misogynistic episode in which men debate whether it's better to marry a young woman or an older woman. And so this is in the course of a description of the younger woman. And at one point, she gets to speak. This is all she gets to say. هي التي تقول أنا التي ألبس وأجلس فاطلب من something something. Okay, so I'm the one who gets dressed and sits. This is a painfully literal rendering. So go look for someone else who will تطلق وتحبس. That seems to be what the scribe wrote the first time through. And then if you go closer, you see that somebody actually went back and changed it to يطلق ويحبس. Which does suggest a relatively plausible meaning. But why was this a good moment? Because when you don't understand something, to discover that 900 years of learned commentary didn't understand it either. And that whenever this was actually, well, we know 11, when was it? 1180, 1191, when it was taught, that there was an argument. Somebody said it's تطلق وتحبس, and someone said no, it must be يطلق ويحبس. So we can almost reconstruct the grammatical discussion that would have happened at that moment. Do I know what it means? No. But am I one step closer to feeling better about guessing? Maybe. Well, I'm not going to guess, but it's actually to the point where I'm collecting interlinear Persian translations just to see what they say about this. If I knew that kind of Persian better, it would help, but we'll see. So this is, and we actually have, thank you, Courtney, we actually have this manuscript here. So during the question period, I'm happy to just look at it with you and talk about anything that strikes you as of interest. Unfortunately, there's water damage. I'll show you. There's a bit of damage in the front, and there's bits missing in the middle. So notice my technical terminology. There are bits missing in the middle. See, I didn't know any of you then. So so yeah, so it's unfortunate that I'm not able to make more use of it, but it's nice to know that it's here. I will conclude with a word on how the manuscript tradition helped me make a choice about translation. As Professor Yarbo was kind enough to mention, I have now finished more or less translating the Maqamat of al-Ḥarīrī, each in a different style of English. It's probably rather small for some of you in the back, but this will give you some sense of the nature of the project. Yes, thank you. You must be a philologist. All right. Yes. Yeah. No, we're getting there. So I'd be happy to tell you more in person about why I'm doing this, but take it for present purposes. Note that each one, based on some thematic consideration, is cast in what is my best shot at imitating these different literary and historical and global English styles. Now, at one point, 34, as Chris very astutely noticed, I didn't have a style. The problem was this. It's about a scam where Abu Zayd, Double Daddy, sells his own son into slavery, which is a scam because the buyer, who is our narrator, doesn't know it's his son and doesn't know the son is actually free. So that when they're taken to the judge, the boy is released, the money is lost because Abu Zayd has already escaped. And in the course of this, episode, we have a poem of which I give you just 2 lines. لحاك الله هل مثلي يباع لكيما تشبع الكرش الجياع ولما سمحت قرونك بامتهاني وأن أشرى كما يشرى المباع. So roughly, may God curse you, should one such as myself be sold to fill hungry bellies. How does your soul allow you to debase me that I should be sold as one sells property? And in other recensions, it's mata'u, which is even more powerful. So this immediately brought to mind, those of you familiar with the writings of Frederick Douglass, says something very interesting. Because remember, it's a boy saying this poem, and one of the things that Douglass continually reverts to in his autobiographies is that he felt an intuitive revulsion to slavery before he understood morally the full implications of that system. So this occurred to me, but then I've had the fortune in my life of having associated with many historians. Some of my best friends are historians. And so it occurred to me that there may be some distortion inherent in, if I were to use Douglas's prose style, which I really wanted to do because he's a fantastic writer, in collapsing, in a sense, American slavery, which has a certain historical context, obviously, and then the pre-modern slavery in an Islamic social context. And as Jonathan Brown would tell us if he were here, these are very different things. And people get very upset about what they perceive to be an ignorance of those differences. So while I wandered perplexed through the pages of al-Wasati, I found this illustration of that maqama. So remember, actually, it begins with the narrator, al-Harith, going to the slave market. And in that market, the enslaved persons are Africans, evidently. I'm not sure who that other fellow is talking to them. Or maybe it's a girl, I can't tell. But so without assuming that, without taking a position on the historical question as a literary strategy, it seemed to me now at least defensible on certain grounds to use an African-American writer as a voice for a maqama, which, apart from anything that al-Ḥarīrī may have thought himself, which I think was inaccessible to us, gives a very powerful indictment of this practice of slavery. So there he is. And the lines that I showed you before in the current draft sound like this. For shame shall I be sold to feed thy little ones, O wouldst thou trade for coin to meet an hour's need one who for better things was made? Is justice blind? Doth she not see the steadfast one who stood by thee? This, by the way, is not Douglas actually, because he doesn't write poetry, but these are the abolitionists, right? The prose is Douglas, and the abolitionists, so this is Whittier and Longfellow, right? These are, so writing in America in this kind of lachrymose 19th century style, which is not that hard to imitate. Have I some fault or flaw concealed? Have I done some wrong or lied about some vice that once revealed decrees that I should be cast aside, bought and sold from hand to hand as if a thing and not a man? So I thank al-Wasati across the centuries for, I think, helping me decide that that's okay. You may disagree, but one has to do something as a translator. That's the terror of it, really. So I think with that, I will conclude. But I invite you to ask anything you want about UCLA's own copy of the Maqamat, which is here. Thank you.